My name is Eva 34, and right now I'm sitting in this cold courtroom watching my soon-to-be ex-husband Marcus smirk from across the aisle. He just leaned over to his lawyer laughing as he whispered, "I'll be richer after this divorce." What he doesn't know is that I have something waiting on page 4 of this document, something that's about to wipe that smug smile right off his face. If you're watching this from your living room or during your commute, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when a judge starts laughing in the middle of divorce proceedings. I met Marcus 5 years ago at a corporate mixer downtown. I was working as an accountant for a small financial firm, dreaming of eventually becoming CFO someday. My colleagues had practically dragged me to this networking event, insisting I needed to get out more and make connections. And little did I know that the most significant connection I'd make that night would ultimately lead to the most painful lesson of my life. Marcus stood out immediately in the crowded hotel ballroom, tall with dark hair perfectly styled, and wearing a suit that screamed success. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that naturally drew people in. He was a real estate broker who had just closed a major commercial property deal, and everyone wanted to talk to him. Somehow, he wanted to talk to me. "You're not trying very hard to network," he said, appearing beside me as I stood awkwardly by the appetizer table. I laughed nervously. Is it that obvious? Only to someone else who's looking for an excuse to avoid small talk. His smile was warm, genuine. "I'm Marcus." There was something immediately disarming about him. While everyone else at the event seemed to be putting on a performance, Marcus felt real. He asked questions about my work and actually listened to my answers. When I told him about my ambition to become a CFO, he didn't dismiss it or offer condescending advice. Instead, he seemed genuinely impressed. "That's incredible," he said. "I love a woman with clear goals." By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers, and he called the very next day to ask me out for dinner. Our first date was at an upscale Italian restaurant where the waiter knew him by name. Marcus ordered wine without looking at the menu, and somehow knew exactly what I'd like. He was charming, attentive, and made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. "Tell me more about your 5-year plan," he said over tiramisu. "I want to know everything." That became our pattern. Romantic dinners where we talked for hours, weekend trips to charming bed and breakfasts in the countryside, surprise gifts left at my apartment. 3 weeks into dating, I came home to find a beautiful leather portfolio on my doorstep with a note that read, "For the future CFO. Can't wait to see what you achieve." Looking back, I can see the warning signs that I ignored. How he would subtly criticize my apartment whenever he visited. "You deserve better than this place," he'd say, making it sound like a compliment, or how he'd question my friendships. "Does Stephanie always talk about her problems this much? You're too good a friend to her." But these comments were always wrapped in what seemed like concern and admiration. And they were vastly outnumbered by the grand gestures and the way he made me feel special. 8 months into our relationship, Marcus proposed during a sunset cruise. He had rented the entire boat, hired a private chef, and as we sailed past the city skyline, he got down on one knee with a diamond ring that caught the last golden rays of sunlight. "Eva," he said, "I've never met anyone like you. You're brilliant, beautiful, and you make me want to be a better man. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" How could I say no? It felt like a fairy tale, and I was overwhelmed with happiness. We set the date for 6 months later. Marcus took charge of most of the planning, insisting that I shouldn't have to worry about details while focusing on my career. He chose the venue, an exclusive country club, selected the caterers, and even had input on my dress. "The lace one brings out your eyes," he said when I was torn between two gowns. "You'll look perfect." Our wedding day was everything I dreamed of as a little girl. My father walked me down the aisle toward Marcus, who actually had tears in his eyes when he saw me. We exchanged vows beneath an arch of white roses, and when the minister pronounced us husband and wife, I genuinely believed I had found my perfect partner. The reception was lavish, a 5-course dinner, a live band, champagne flowing freely. As we danced our first dance, Marcus whispered in my ear, "I'm going to give you the world, Eva." I believed him. Standing there in his arms, surrounded by friends and family, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. I had a successful career, and now I had found the perfect man who supported my ambitions and wanted to build a future together. If only I had known that the man I was dancing with was wearing a mask. If only I had realized that the Marcus I fell in love with was a carefully constructed illusion designed to capture exactly what he wanted. If only I had seen that beneath his charming exterior lay someone calculating, controlling, and ultimately cruel. But at that moment, spinning across the dance floor in my white dress, all I felt was joy and limitless possibility. The warning signs I had dismissed as quirks or momentary lapses seemed inconsequential in the face of such overwhelming happiness. "I love you, Mrs. Bradford," Marcus said as we cut the cake together. "I love you too," I replied, never imagining that in less than 3 years I would be sitting across from him in a courtroom fighting for my dignity and what was rightfully mine. Our honeymoon in Italy was something out of a dream. 2 weeks of wandering cobblestone streets hand in hand, eating gelato by ancient fountains, and watching sunsets over vineyards. Marcus was attentive romantic and seemed genuinely interested in every thought I shared. We talked about our future, the home we would build together, our career aspirations, even what we'd name our children if we decided to have them. On our last night in a beautiful villa overlooking the Amalfi Coast, Marcus toasted to new beginnings and a lifetime of happiness. I clinked my glass against his, utterly convinced that I had made the right choice. The flight home felt like descending from a cloud of perfect bliss back to reality. But I wasn't worried. Our real life together would be just as wonderful as our honeymoon, wouldn't it? The first hint that something had changed came when we were unpacking. I had bought a beautiful handmade ceramic bowl as a souvenir, and as I unwrapped it from its protective paper, Marcus frowned. "How much did that cost?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "About 70 euros, I replied, confused by his tone. "It's hand-painted by a local artist. I thought it would look nice on the dining table." "That's pretty expensive for something that could break so easily," he said. "We should be more careful with our spending now that we're combining finances." I brushed it off as post-vacation budget consciousness. After all, we had spent quite a bit on our honeymoon. But over the next few weeks, similar comments multiplied. When the statement from my personal credit card arrived, Marcus picked it up before I could. He flipped through the pages with furrowed brows. "$60 at Sephora wasn't your birthday months ago?" "I needed to replace some makeup," I explained, feeling oddly defensive. "And this lunch at Riverside Cafe for $30, was that necessary?" "I was meeting Stephanie," I said. "We try to catch up once a month." Marcus sighed. "I just think we should be more strategic about our spending. We have goals, remember." A week later, he approached me as I was preparing for work. "I've been thinking," he said, sitting on the edge of our bed. "It might make sense for you to quit your job." I stared at him in disbelief. "Quit? Why would I do that?" "Well, I'm making more than enough for both of us. You're always talking about how stressful your job is. Wouldn't it be nice to have time to focus on our home? Maybe think about starting a family sooner rather than later." "Marcus, I love my job. I just got promoted last quarter, and we agreed we'd wait at least 2 years before even considering children." His expression hardened slightly. "I thought you'd at least consider it. For us." "I am thinking of us," I countered. "My career is important to me. You knew that when we got married." He left the room without another word, and the tension lingered for days. It was our first real disagreement as a married couple, and it set a pattern that would repeat with increasing frequency. Soon after, Marcus suggested we consolidate our finances for simplicity. He wanted to close my individual accounts and create joint ones that he would primarily manage. "I have more experience with investments," he explained. "It just makes sense for me to handle the big financial decisions." I resisted pointing out that as an accountant, I was perfectly capable of managing money. This led to several heated arguments with Marcus, eventually accusing me of not trusting him. "Don't you think it's weird that my own wife won't share finances with me?" "What are you hiding, Eva?" To keep the peace, I agreed to a compromise. We would maintain separate accounts for our individual incomes, but create a joint account for household expenses. Marcus wasn't happy, but accepted the arrangement. However, he began scrutinizing every purchase I made, questioning the necessity of everything from a new work blazer to lunch with colleagues. 3 months after our honeymoon, Marcus came home driving a brand new luxury SUV. I was shocked we hadn't discussed such a major purchase at all. "What do you think?" he asked proudly, as if expecting me to be thrilled. "It's nice," I said carefully. "But shouldn't we have talked about this first?" "That's a huge purchase." His smile faltered. "I got an incredible deal. It was too good to pass up." "That's not the point, Marcus. We agreed to discuss big expenses together." "It's just a car, Eva." "Why are you making such a big deal about this? I thought you'd be happy for me." That night, after Marcus had gone to sleep, I sat in our kitchen with a small notebook. Something wasn't right. The man who had been so supportive of my goals and dreams before marriage was slowly being replaced by someone controlling and dismissive. I began jotting down instances of his behavior that troubled me, not yet ready to call it what it was, but needing to track the pattern that was emerging. Around this time, my friend Stephanie invited me to lunch. We'd been friends since college, but I'd been seeing less of her since the wedding, partly because Marcus often made comments about how she monopolized my time. "How's married life?" she asked once we were seated. "Good," I said automatically, then hesitated. "Mostly good. Some adjustments." Stephanie studied my face. "You seem different. Tense." And I found myself telling her about the financial arguments, the luxury SUV, Marcus's suggestion that I quit my job. As I spoke, I could see concern growing in her eyes. "Eva," she said gently, "some of this sounds concerning. Is Marcus always trying to control decisions?" "He's not controlling," I said quickly. "He's just particular, and he wants what's best for us. Does he want what's best for him?" I changed the subject, uncomfortable with the direction our conversation was taking. Stephanie was single. She couldn't understand the compromises of marriage, I told myself. Every relationship had its growing pains. But on the drive home, her words echoed in my mind. That night, I added another entry to my notebook, which was now hidden in my desk drawer at work. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was normal. But somewhere deep down, a voice was telling me to pay attention. 6 months into our marriage, Marcus's behavior continued to change in subtle but significant ways. What had once felt like occasional controlling moments had evolved into a constant undercurrent in our relationship. His comments about my spending became more frequent and critical. "Another coffee shop charge. Do you realize how much money you waste on coffee every month?" he would say while reviewing our bank statements, which he now insisted on doing together. "It's my money, Marcus," I would remind him. "I earned it. We're married now. Your money, my money, it's our money. And we need to be smart about it." What made it confusing was how these controlling moments would be interspersed with glimpses of the charming, attentive man I had fallen in love with. He would criticize my spending one day, then surprise me with flowers the next, leaving me constantly off balance. Meanwhile, Marcus's career as a real estate broker was flourishing. He was bringing in bigger clients, closing more expensive properties, and his commission checks were growing impressively. He began spending more time at networking events and client dinners, often coming home late, smelling of expensive cologne and alcohol. When I expressed concern about his late nights, he would dismiss me. "This is how business gets done, Eva. Not everyone has the luxury of a 9-to-5 job." 3 months later, I received news that made my heart soar. I was being promoted to senior financial analyst, a significant step toward my CFO goal. I couldn't wait to tell Marcus, remembering how supportive he had been of my career ambitions when we were dating. I prepared his favorite dinner and bought a bottle of champagne to celebrate. When Marcus arrived home, I eagerly shared my news. "That's nice," he said after a pause that lasted a beat too long. He didn't meet my eyes. "Nice, Marcus, this is a huge step for me. It comes with a substantial raise and puts me directly on track for upper management." He took a long sip of champagne. "I just wonder if it's the right time. You'll have more responsibilities, longer hours. How will that affect our home life? Our plans for the future?" I sat back deflated. "I thought you'd be happy for me." "Of course I am," he said, reaching for my hand. "I just worry about you taking on too much stress. I make enough for both of us, you know." That night while Marcus slept, I added another entry to my secret notebook. Promotion announcement. M not supportive. Suggested I don't need to work since he earns enough. As the weeks passed, Marcus began coming home later and later. The client dinners and networking events multiplied. When I'd call to check when he'd be home, he often wouldn't answer, only to text hours later with vague explanations. One night while doing laundry, I found a receipt in his suit pocket from a restaurant I didn't recognize. The bill was for dinner for two, and included a bottle of wine that cost more than our weekly grocery budget. When I asked him about it, his response was immediate and defensive. "Are you spying on me now?" "It was a client dinner. Do you really think I need to report every business meal to you?" "I wasn't spying," I said, taken aback by his anger. "I was doing laundry and found the receipt." "Well, it's part of my job. Not everything needs to be analyzed and questioned, Eva. You're becoming paranoid." The next day, while Marcus was in the shower, I heard his phone buzz repeatedly on the nightstand. I had never been the type to snoop, but something in me had reached a breaking point. I glanced at the screen and saw a message preview from someone named Nat. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Same time Friday. My stomach dropped. I quickly put the phone down before Marcus could catch me looking, my mind racing. Who was Nat? Could it be innocent? A new client, perhaps? But the wording felt intimate, personal. That evening, I confronted him, trying to keep my voice steady. Marcus, is there something you want to tell me about your late nights? He looked up from his laptop, expression neutral. What do you mean? I saw a text on your phone this morning, from someone named Nat. His face darkened. You were going through my phone? No, I saw a notification. The message was visible on your lock screen. Who is Nat Marcus? Natalie is my new assistant at the office. She was confirming a client meeting for Friday. His voice was even, his gaze steady. I can't believe you're actually accusing me of something inappropriate. Is this what our marriage has come to? You don't trust me at all. He was so convincing, so hurt by my accusation that I found myself apologizing. But later, as I lay awake beside him, doubt gnawed at me. Why hadn't he ever mentioned hiring an assistant? Why was she texting him so late at night? And why did the message sound so personal? The next day, I called Stephanie during my lunch break and told her everything. Eva, she said after listening patiently, this doesn't sound right. The way he turns everything around on you, it's gaslighting. Gaslighting. The term sounded vaguely familiar. It's a form of manipulation where someone makes you question your own reality. He's making you doubt your perfectly reasonable concerns and feel guilty for having them. What should I do? Stephanie was quiet for a moment. If I were you, I'd start gathering information. Don't confront him again until you know more. And whatever you do, protect yourself financially and emotionally. Her advice resonated with me. That afternoon, I began meticulously tracking our finances. I discovered Marcus had opened several credit cards I knew nothing about. There were regular transfers from our joint account to one I couldn't access. Something was definitely wrong. After careful consideration, I made a decision that felt both extreme and necessary. I hired a private investigator named Richard. He was recommended by a colleague who had gone through a difficult divorce, and while I wasn't yet ready to admit my marriage might be heading in that direction, I needed answers. Richard was professional and discreet. I'll follow him for 2 weeks, he said during our confidential meeting. Document his activities, take photographs if relevant. Then we'll discuss what I find. Those 2 weeks were agonizing. I maintained a facade of normalcy at home, all while knowing a stranger was tracking my husband's movements. Marcus continued his pattern of late nights and vague explanations, seeming oblivious to my internal turmoil. When Richard finally called to arrange a meeting, his tone told me everything I needed to know before he even shared his findings. We met in a quiet coffee shop across town. Richard placed a manila envelope on the table between us. Mrs. Bradford, he said gently, I'm afraid your suspicions were correct. Inside the envelope were photographs of Marcus entering an upscale apartment building arm in arm with a young woman. Other photos showed them dining intimately at restaurants, holding hands across the table. There was even one of them kissing in the parking lot of his office building. Her name is Natalie Carson, Richard explained. She's 26, and according to my sources, she's been working as Marcus's assistant for about 8 months. 8 months. They had been together almost as long as Marcus and I had been married. There's more, Richard said, hesitation in his voice. They seem to be spending significant time at this apartment. He pointed to the building in the photos. Property records show it was purchased 4 months ago by an LLC. The LLC's mailing address matches your husband's office. My world collapsed around me. Marcus hadn't just been cheating, he had bought property to facilitate his affair. How much of our money, my money, had gone into this secret love nest? I left the coffee shop in a daze, the envelope of evidence clutched in my hands. Despite the undeniable proof, part of me still couldn't believe the man I had married could betray me so completely. But the facts were irrefutable, captured in high-resolution photographs and property records. I didn't confront Marcus that night, or the next. I needed time to process, to plan. Stephanie's words echoed in my mind, protect yourself. And that's exactly what I intended to do. For the next 3 months, I lived a double life. To Marcus, I was still his somewhat naive, increasingly compliant wife. I stopped questioning his late nights. I no longer objected to his financial decisions. I played the role he expected, while silently gathering evidence and preparing for what I now knew was inevitable. Richard continued to provide updates documenting Marcus's ongoing affair with Natalie. But more importantly, he helped me uncover the extent of Marcus's financial deception. Through careful investigation, we discovered that Marcus had been systematically diverting funds from our joint accounts to private ones in his name only. He had invested in properties through shell companies, hiding assets that should have been considered marital property. The apartment he shared with Natalie was just the tip of the iceberg. One Tuesday morning, while Marcus was supposedly at a real estate conference, I took a personal day from work and went to his home office. I knew his computer password. It was our wedding date, ironically enough, and I began searching through his files. What I found made me sick to my stomach. In a folder labeled Personal, I discovered emails between Marcus and his friend Jack dating back to before our wedding. In them, Marcus referred to me as his meal ticket and discussed how my stable income and excellent credit score would help him secure larger loans for his real estate ventures. Once we're married, her income counts toward household earnings for loan applications, he wrote. With her credit history backing me, I can finally make some real money. There were other emails, other conversations that revealed the calculating way Marcus had approached our relationship from the very beginning. But the most shocking discovery came when I found a document titled Prenup Final PDF. Marcus and I had never signed a prenuptial agreement. We had discussed it briefly before the wedding, and I had actually been open to the idea, but Marcus had dismissed it saying, "We don't need that, I trust you completely." Yet here was a prenuptial agreement supposedly signed by both of us, heavily favoring Marcus in the event of a divorce. It stated that I would waive rights to any business assets or investments made during our marriage. It limited any potential alimony to a laughably small amount. And at the bottom was what appeared to be my signature. I stared at it in disbelief. It was close to my handwriting, but not quite right. Marcus had forged my signature on a prenuptial agreement, creating a document he could use against me if our marriage ended. My hands shaking, I forwarded these files to my personal email, and then carefully restored the computer to exactly how I'd found it. I felt violated, betrayed in ways I hadn't even imagined possible. The man I had married was not just a cheater, but a calculated con artist who had targeted me from the beginning. That same day, I contacted Stephanie, who recommended her cousin Samantha, a family law attorney specializing in high-conflict divorces. "If anyone can help you through this, it's Sam," Stephanie assured me. Samantha Turner's office was warm and professional, much like the attorney herself. After I shared my story and presented the evidence I had gathered, she looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Eva, what your husband has done, the financial deception, the forged prenuptial agreement, these are serious legal issues. In fact, the forgery could potentially have criminal implications." "What should I do?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed. "First, we need to secure your finances. Today, I want you to open new accounts at a different bank in your name only. Transfer your personal funds there. Don't touch the joint accounts yet, that would tip him off." She continued outlining a strategic plan. "We'll need to gather official documentation of all marital assets. We'll request his business records through discovery once we file. The forged prenup is actually a gift. It shows the lengths he's willing to go to deceive you and the court." "Should I confront him?" I asked. Samantha shook her head firmly. "Not yet. Marcus doesn't know what you've discovered. That's our advantage. We need to be fully prepared before you make any moves." Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Samantha and a forensic accountant she recommended. We documented every aspect of our financial life properties, investments, retirement accounts, credit cards, loans. We obtained copies of tax returns, bank statements, property deeds, all while I maintained a facade of normalcy at home. The hardest part was pretending, smiling at Marcus when he came home late, listening to his lies about client meetings when I knew exactly where he'd been and with whom, acting as if my world hadn't been shattered by his betrayal. Then came the night I overheard a phone call that confirmed everything. I had come home early from a dinner with Stephanie, and Marcus was in his office door slightly ajar, speaking in low tones. "The prenup is solid," he was saying. "She has no idea it exists. When I file for divorce, she'll be blindsided. Yes, I've been moving assets to the protected accounts. No, she doesn't question anything. She trusts me completely. I should be able to walk away with virtually everything." There was a pause, then a laugh that made my blood run cold. "Natalie's been patient. Once this is over, we can stop hiding. Yes, by summer, we should be in the clear. Eva will be history, and I'll have the capital I need for the Riverside development." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid he would hear it. Marcus wasn't just planning to leave me. He had been systematically preparing to destroy me financially when he did. The next morning after Marcus left for work, I called Samantha. I'm ready, I said. I want to file for divorce. 2 days later, with all my personal belongings, moved to a small apartment Stephanie helped me find, I finally confronted Marcus. I chose a public place, a cafe we used to frequent when we were dating, knowing his reaction might be unpredictable. When I told him I wanted a divorce, his expression shifted from shock to anger to calculation in the span of seconds. Is this some kind of joke? He asked, keeping his voice low. No, Marcus. I've already moved out. I've hired an attorney. It's over. His face hardened. You have no idea what you're doing. If you think you're getting anything in a divorce, you're delusional. We have a prenup, remember? The lie came so easily to him, so convincingly, that for a moment I almost doubted myself. But I held firm. I've already filed the paperwork. You'll be served tomorrow. His mask slipped, then revealing the rage beneath. You stupid, ungrateful woman. Do you have any idea what I could do to you? You'll leave this marriage with nothing, not a penny. I've made sure of that. I stood up, surprisingly calm in the face of his anger. Goodbye, Marcus. All further communication should go through my attorney. As I walked away, I heard him call after me. You'll regret this, Eva. I promise you that. Maybe the old Eva would have been terrified by that threat. But I wasn't the same woman who had walked down the aisle with hearts in her eyes 2 years ago. I had been through the fire of betrayal and emerged stronger, more determined than ever to fight for what was rightfully mine. The weeks following my confrontation with Marcus were some of the most challenging of my life. True to his word, he seemed determined to make the divorce process as difficult and painful as possible. Immediately after being served divorce papers, Marcus emptied our joint bank accounts and canceled my access to our shared credit cards. He claimed it was a precautionary measure to protect marital assets, but the intent was clear: to leave me financially vulnerable. Fortunately, thanks to Samantha's foresight, I had already secured my personal funds and opened new accounts. Still, the financial strain was significant. I had to find an affordable apartment quickly and adjust to living on a much tighter budget while legal expenses mounted. My parents, Robert and Linda, were my rocks during this time. When I finally told them the full story of Marcus's betrayal, they were heartbroken for me, but immediately supportive. Come stay with us until you get back on your feet, my father insisted. Your old room is always waiting for you. At 34, moving back in with my parents wasn't what I had envisioned, but their support was a lifeline. My mother helped me move my belongings from the small temporary apartment to their suburban home, while my father connected me with a financial advisor to help rebuild my credit after Marcus's damage. Marcus, meanwhile, had hired Benjamin Stern, one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the city. Stern had a reputation for ruthless tactics and dragging out proceedings to wear down the opposing party emotionally and financially. Don't worry, Samantha reassured me when I expressed concern about Stern's involvement. I've gone up against Benjamin before. He's all bluster and intimidation. We have the truth on our side. But the truth didn't stop Marcus and his attorney from trying to paint me as an unstable, financially irresponsible wife in their initial filings. They claimed I had made excessive personal purchases and neglected marital responsibilities. They even suggested I had been unfaithful, a projection so absurd it would have been laughable if it weren't so hurtful. Most disturbingly, they produced the forged prenuptial agreement, claiming it was valid and legally binding. They're actually submitting this forgery to the court, I said in disbelief when Samantha showed me the filing. This is good for us, she explained. They've just entered fraudulent evidence. We can prove it's a forgery with expert testimony. Marcus has essentially handed us a weapon to use against him. We hired a handwriting expert who confirmed what I already knew. The signature on the prenuptial agreement was not mine. It was a reasonably good attempt, but failed to match several distinctive characteristics of my authentic signature. The days leading up to our first mediation session were tense. Marcus began sending me text messages ranging from pleading to threatening. We can work this out between us, Eva. No need for lawyers to get rich off our problems. Then hours later, you have no idea who you're messing with. I will destroy you in court. Samantha advised me to document everything but not respond directly. This is classic manipulation. He's trying to engage you outside of legal channels. Don't take the bait. The mediation session was as unpleasant as I had anticipated. Marcus arrived with Benjamin Stern and, shockingly, Natalie, whom he introduced as his executive assistant. The message was clear: he wasn't even trying to hide his affair anymore. Throughout the session, Marcus was condescending and dismissive of my claims. When our financial disclosures were discussed, he insisted that many of his investments were separate property, not subject to division, despite having been acquired during our marriage. Benjamin Stern presented the prenuptial agreement with complete confidence, as if daring us to challenge it. My client has been more than generous in his settlement offer, considering the valid prenuptial agreement Mrs. Bradford willingly signed. Samantha remained professional but firm. We categorically reject the validity of this document and have expert testimony confirming the signature is forged. Additionally, we have evidence of substantial hidden assets and financial misconduct. The mediator, attempting to remain neutral, suggested we might need court intervention if we couldn't find common ground. Marcus smiled at this, clearly believing the judge would side with him. As we left the failed mediation, Marcus caught up to me in the hallway. "Last chance, Eva," he said quietly, making sure no one else could hear. "Take the settlement offer, $20,000, and we both walk away. Otherwise, I'll make sure you leave with nothing but debt." I looked into the eyes of the man I had once loved and saw nothing but a cold stranger. "See you in court, Marcus," I replied and walked away. That night I barely slept. The stress was taking a physical toll. I had lost weight, developed persistent headaches, and found myself jumping at every unexpected noise. What if Marcus was right? What if he managed to convince the judge that the prenup was valid? What if his financial deceptions were too complex to unravel? In the darkest hours of the night, doubt crept in. Marcus was wealthy, connected, and completely ruthless. I was fighting not just for my financial security, but for justice, for vindication that I hadn't been a fool to trust him. The next morning, Stephanie came over with coffee and bagels, a simple gesture that meant the world to me. "How are you holding up?" she asked, genuine concern in her eyes. "Honestly, I'm terrified," I admitted. "Marcus seems so confident. What if he wins?" Stephanie took my hand. "Listen to me. Men like Marcus count on intimidation to get their way. They bet on women backing down, giving up. But you're stronger than he knows. You've already survived the worst part, discovering his betrayal and walking away. Now it's just about seeing it through." Her words bolstered my resolve. I might be scared, but I wouldn't be intimidated into surrendering what was rightfully mine. Marcus had already taken enough from me, my trust, my sense of security, years of my life. I wouldn't let him take my dignity or financial future too. As our court date approached, Samantha and I prepared meticulously. We compiled all the evidence of Marcus's financial deceptions. We prepared my testimony. We even practiced potential cross-examination scenarios so I wouldn't be caught off guard by Stern's aggressive questioning. Remember, Samantha coached me in that courtroom, you need to be calm, factual, and dignified. No matter what they say, don't let them provoke an emotional response. Judges respond to composure, not outbursts. I took her advice to heart, practicing deep breathing techniques and visualization exercises to prepare for facing Marcus in court. I knew it would be one of the most challenging days of my life, but also potentially the beginning of true freedom from his manipulation and control. The night before the hearing, my father knocked on my bedroom door. He sat beside me on the edge of the bed just as he had done when I was a child frightened by nightmares. "I want you to know how proud I am of you," he said simply. "It takes courage to stand up for yourself the way you're doing." "I'm scared, Dad," I confessed. "Being brave isn't about not being scared," he replied. "It's about doing what's right even when you are scared. And tomorrow, that's exactly what you're going to do." With my family's support, Stephanie's unwavering friendship, and Samantha's legal expertise, I went to bed that night knowing I had done everything possible to prepare. Whatever happened in court tomorrow, I would face it with my head held high. The courtroom awaited, and with it the moment that would determine whether Marcus's mockery would be his final victory or the prelude to his downfall. The morning of our court date dawned crisp and clear. I had barely slept, rehearsing what I would say and how I would react when face to face with Marcus before a judge. My mother helped me select an outfit, a conservative navy blue suit that projected professionalism and credibility. "You look strong," she said as I checked my appearance one final time. "Remember that feeling when you walk into that courtroom?" Samantha met me at the courthouse steps, immaculate, in a tailored charcoal suit, her briefcase bulging with our carefully prepared documentation. "Ready?" she asked, her expression conveying confidence and reassurance. "As I'll ever be," I replied, taking a deep breath. The family court was smaller than I had imagined, from television dramas more intimate, and therefore somehow more intimidating. Marcus was already seated at the respondents' table with Benjamin Stern when we entered. Natalie sat directly behind them in the first row of public seating, as if to flaunt their relationship. I kept my eyes forward as we made our way to the plaintiff's table, but I could feel Marcus's gaze following me, practically hear his smirk without having to see it. My parents and Stephanie filed into the row behind me, their presence a silent wall of support. All rise for the Honorable Judge Alexander Thompson, the bailiff announced, and everyone stood as the judge entered from his chambers. Judge Thompson was older than I expected, perhaps in his early 60s, with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He had a reputation for being fair, but no nonsense, unwilling to tolerate theatrics or delays in his courtroom. After the preliminaries, Benjamin Stern presented their case first. He rose with theatrical confidence, buttoning his expensive suit jacket as he approached the judge. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter," he began. "Mr. Bradford and Mrs. Bradford entered into a clear prenuptial agreement prior to their marriage." He held up a copy of the forged document. "This agreement, which Mrs. Bradford willingly signed, stipulates that Mr. Bradford's business holdings remain his separate property in the event of dissolution." He continued painting Marcus as a hardworking, successful businessman, and me as a spendthrift who had contributed little to the financial partnership. He claimed I had extravagant spending habits, and implied I was simply trying to cash in on Marcus's success now that the marriage was ending. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Stern added with practiced gravity, "Mrs. Bradford's accusations of financial misconduct are nothing but a desperate attempt to circumvent the prenuptial agreement she now regrets signing. Mr. Bradford has fully disclosed all assets as required by law." Throughout this character assassination, I maintained the composed expression Samantha had coached me to hold, though internally I was seething. I could see Marcus nodding along to his lawyer's lies, occasionally glancing back at Natalie with a small, satisfied smile. When Stern finished his opening statement, Judge Thompson looked over his glasses at him. "Thank you, Mr. Stern. Ms. Turner, you may present for the plaintiff." Samantha rose with quiet dignity. Unlike Stern's theatrical approach, her style was measured and precise. "Your Honor, this case is indeed straightforward, but not for the reasons Mr. Stern suggests. This is a case about deception, fraud, and calculated financial abuse." She outlined how Marcus had systematically hidden assets, diverted funds from our joint accounts, and most damningly forged my signature on a prenuptial agreement that had never been presented to me, much less signed by me. "We have expert testimony confirming the signature on this purported agreement is not Mrs. Bradford's," Samantha explained, introducing the report from our handwriting expert. "Furthermore, we have evidence that Mr. Bradford has concealed substantial marital assets through a series of shell companies and fraudulent transfers." As she spoke, I watched Judge Thompson's expression shift from neutral to increasingly concerned. He interrupted occasionally to ask clarifying questions, particularly about the timeline of the financial transactions Samantha was describing. Marcus, who had looked bored during Samantha's opening, began to show signs of agitation as she methodically laid out his deceptions. He leaned over repeatedly to whisper urgently to Stern, who would pat his arm reassuringly. When testimony began, Marcus took the stand first. Under Stern's friendly questioning, he portrayed himself as a devoted husband, blindsided by my decision to leave. He spoke about how he had supported my career ambitions and only wanted what was best for our family. "And the prenuptial agreement," Stern prompted. "Eva and I discussed it thoroughly before our wedding." Marcus lied smoothly. "She understood that protecting my business interests was important, and she signed it willingly. I have witnesses who saw her sign." During cross-examination, Samantha was surgical in her approach. She presented bank records showing the systematic movement of funds to accounts in Marcus's name only. She produced emails between Marcus and his business partners discussing how to shield assets from marital claims. With each piece of evidence, Marcus's confident demeanor cracked slightly. "Mr. Bradford," Samantha asked, "can you explain why you purchased a condominium through an LLC 4 months ago without disclosing it in your financial declarations?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "That was a business investment, not a personal purchase." "A business investment that happens to be where your assistant Ms. Carson has been residing rent-free?" The question hung in the air unanswered, as Marcus glanced nervously at Natalie. By the time I took the stand, the momentum had shifted palpably. I testified calmly about discovering the forged prenuptial agreement, about Marcus's controlling behavior with our finances, about overhearing his phone conversation planning to leave me penniless. Benjamin Stern's cross-examination was aggressive, clearly designed to provoke an emotional response that would undermine my credibility. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Bradford, that you're simply experiencing buyer's remorse about the prenuptial agreement now that you see how valuable my client's business has become. No, I replied evenly. I never saw or signed any such agreement. And yet your signature appears on it, he countered, holding up the document. That is not my signature, I stated firmly. As the expert witness testified, it's a forgery. Stern tried several more angles, suggesting I was vindictive, greedy, or delusional. But Samantha had prepared me well, and I maintained my composure throughout. When testimony concluded, Judge Thompson called for closing arguments. Benjamin Stern went first, doubling down on the narrative that I was trying to circumvent a valid prenuptial agreement out of greed. During his argument, I noticed Marcus leaning back in his chair with renewed confidence. He caught my eye across the courtroom and smirked, then leaned toward Natalie and whispered something that made her smile. It was this moment of arrogance that made what happened next all the sweeter. As Samantha delivered her closing argument, she methodically dismantled every claim Marcus and Stern had made. She highlighted the evidence of financial deception, emphasized the expert testimony confirming the forged signature, and argued passionately for an equitable division of marital assets. When she finished, Judge Thompson removed his glasses and looked thoughtfully at both tables before speaking. Before I render my decision, I'd like to ask if either party has anything further to add. He looked first at Marcus, who shook his head, then at me. Mrs. Bradford, I felt a moment of absolute clarity. This was it, the moment to reveal what page 4 contained. Samantha and I had strategically held back one piece of evidence, saving it for precisely this moment. I stood slowly, heart pounding, but voice steady. Yes, Your Honor, page 4. The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Thompson looked puzzled for a moment. Then understanding dawned on his face as Samantha handed him a document pointing specifically to the 4th page. I watched as he read it, his eyebrows rising steadily. He glanced at Marcus, then back at the document, and couldn't suppress a small, disbelieving laugh. Page 4 contained an email exchange between Marcus and his friend Jack, dated just 3 weeks ago. In it, Marcus explicitly discussed the forged prenuptial agreement, writing, "Don't worry about Eva contesting the prenup. She doesn't even know it exists. I had Greg forge her signature last year. It's good enough to fool a judge. By the time she figures it out, if she ever does, I'll have everything moved offshore." The email continued with details of exactly how Marcus planned to hide assets and manipulate the divorce proceedings, including coaching Natalie on what to say if questioned about their relationship timeline. Judge Thompson looked up from the document, his expression stern. "Mr. Bradford, are you familiar with the contents of this email?" Marcus had gone pale. That's not... It could be taken out of context." "I see." The judge turned to Benjamin Stern. "Mr. Stern, were you aware of this correspondence when you presented the prenuptial agreement to this court as authentic?" Stern, clearly blindsided, stammered, "No, Your Honor, I was not aware." Judge Thompson's face hardened. "Given this new evidence, I am immediately ruling the purported prenuptial agreement null and void. Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by what appears to be an attempt to commit fraud upon this court." Marcus started to protest, but the judge cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Mr. Bradford, I strongly advise you to remain silent at this time. Based on the totality of evidence presented, I find compelling proof of hidden assets and financial misconduct." He turned to Samantha. "Ms. Turner, I will grant your motion for a forensic accounting of all Mr. Bradford's business entities and personal accounts." The judge continued. "I am ordering that all marital assets be frozen immediately pending completion of the accounting. And Mr. Bradford," he added, fixing Marcus with a stern gaze, "I am forwarding evidence of potential forgery to the district attorney's office for review. This court does not look kindly upon fraudulent documentation." Marcus sat stunned, the smirk long gone from his face. Beside him, Benjamin Stern looked both angry and embarrassed to have been associated with such blatant deception. As we left the courtroom, Marcus attempted to approach me, his expression a mixture of rage and panic, but the bailiff stepped between us. The last thing I saw was Natalie quickly gathering her things and slipping out a side door, apparently unwilling to stand by Marcus, now that his deceptions had been exposed. Outside on the courthouse steps, surrounded by my parents and Stephanie, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The fight wasn't completely over. The financial untangling would take months, but the truth had prevailed. Marcus's mockery in court had backfired spectacularly, undone by his own arrogant words on page 4. Samantha squeezed my arm gently. "You did it, Eva. You stood your ground." And for the first time in months, I felt something that had been missing for far too long: hope for the future, a future that was now mine to shape on my own terms. 6 months after that decisive day in court, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined while trapped in the suffocating web of Marcus's manipulation. I had moved into a modest but bright one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I loved. The space was entirely mine, decorated according to my taste, without anyone questioning my choices or criticizing my preferences. Each piece of furniture, each decorative touch represented a small reclamation of my identity. The forensic accounting ordered by Judge Thompson had uncovered even more financial deception than we initially suspected. Marcus had hidden assets in offshore accounts, made fraudulent transfers to business associates who later returned the funds, and systematically underreported his income to minimize potential support obligations. When all was said and done, I received a fair settlement that acknowledged my contributions to our marriage and compensated me for Marcus's financial misconduct. It wasn't about getting rich from the divorce, it was about justice and starting my new life on stable footing. Professionally, things had also taken an unexpected but wonderful turn. During the divorce proceedings, my work had been my sanctuary, the one place where I felt competent and in control. My focus and dedication during such a difficult personal time impressed my supervisors, and when our company's CFO announced her retirement, I was encouraged to apply for the position. "We need someone with both technical expertise and personal resilience," my CEO had said during my interview. "You've demonstrated both in abundance." At 34, I achieved the career goal I had been working toward since college. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Marcus had tried to diminish my professional ambitions, his actions had ultimately helped accelerate my career advancement. But the emotional recovery proved more challenging than the financial or professional one. In the immediate aftermath of the divorce, I experienced waves of conflicting emotions: relief at my escape, rage at his betrayal, shame at having been deceived, and fear about my future. I keep asking myself how I didn't see it. I confessed to Stephanie during one of our regular dinners. "There were so many warning signs." "Because you're a good person who expects others to be good too," she replied. "That's not a character flaw, Eva. It's a quality worth protecting even after everything that happened." To help process these complex feelings, I joined a support group for people who had experienced similar relationship trauma. Hearing others' stories helped me understand that Marcus's behavior followed textbook patterns of narcissistic abuse. The knowledge that I wasn't alone, that others had survived similar experiences and rebuilt happy lives, was profoundly healing. Through the group, I made new friends who understood my journey in ways even my most supportive existing friends couldn't fully grasp. Amanda, who had left her controlling husband after 15 years, became a particularly close confidant. Rachel, who had endured financial abuse similar to what I experienced, helped me develop healthier approaches to money management. I also sought individual therapy, working with a counselor who specialized in recovery from manipulative relationships. Dr. Winters helped me identify the subtle ways Marcus had undermined my self-confidence and decision-making abilities over time. "Healing isn't linear," she reminded me during one particularly difficult session. "You'll have days when you feel strong and empowered, and days when doubt and pain resurface. Both are part of the process." She was right. Some mornings I woke up feeling like a survivor, proud of my courage in standing up to Marcus and reclaiming my life. Other days, a random trigger, a cologne similar to his, a restaurant we had frequented, even certain songs on the radio, would plunge me back into the emotional turmoil of the marriage and its aftermath. But gradually, the good days began to outnumber the difficult ones. I developed new routines that nourished my spirit: morning yoga, weekend hikes with Stephanie, cooking classes that helped me rediscover the joy of preparing meals after years of Marcus criticizing my culinary efforts. I reconnected with friends Marcus had subtly driven away during our marriage, rebuilding relationships that had once been important to me. I visited my parents more often, grateful for their unwavering support through the darkest period of my life. My experience also inspired me to help others. I began volunteering at a women's resource center, offering financial literacy workshops for women leaving abusive relationships. Using my accounting background to empower others became one of the most rewarding aspects of my new life. Richard, the private investigator, who had helped uncover Marcus's affair, became an unexpected friend. We occasionally met for coffee, and he shared stories from his decades of work that helped me see my experience in the broader context of human behavior. "You know what sets you apart from many clients I've had," he said during one of our meetings. "You acted on the information." So many people discover the truth, but then convince themselves to stay to give another chance. You had the courage to walk away. As for Marcus, his life had taken a decidedly different turn. The district attorney had pursued charges for the forged prenuptial agreement, resulting in probation and a significant fine. His real estate business suffered as word spread of his unethical behavior, with many clients unwilling to work with someone who had demonstrated such dishonesty. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Natalie had left him just 2 months after the court hearing, apparently having realized that a man who had so thoroughly deceived one partner would likely do the same to another. Marcus's carefully constructed image as a successful, charming businessman had crumbled, revealing the manipulative person beneath. But strangely, I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. The energy I had once spent loving him, then fearing him, then fighting him, was now directed toward building my own life. His choices had led to natural consequences, just as my choice to stand up for myself had led to my current freedom and peace. On the anniversary of our divorce finalization, I didn't commemorate the date with bitterness or celebration. Instead, I took myself to dinner at a restaurant I had always wanted to try, but that Marcus had dismissed as not exclusive enough. Sitting there alone, enjoying a meal chosen entirely according to my preferences, I reflected on how far I had come. The woman who had once apologized for spending her own money, who had doubted her perceptions when confronted with obvious lies, who had nearly surrendered her financial future out of intimidation, that woman was gone. In her place sat someone stronger, wiser, and fundamentally unchanged in her capacity for kindness and trust, despite having ample reason to become cynical. I realized that the greatest victory wasn't the favorable settlement or seeing Marcus face consequences for his actions. The true triumph was internal. I had reclaimed myself. My judgment, my confidence, my ability to trust my own perceptions, all had been tested and ultimately strengthened through this painful journey. As I finished my meal and walked home through the twilight, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for what had happened, I would never be thankful for betrayal or deception, but for what I had discovered about myself in surviving it. I had learned that I possessed a resilience I hadn't known was there, a core of strength that could withstand even the most intimate form of betrayal. Sometimes the most valuable lesson life teaches us is that we are capable of enduring what once seemed unendurable. And sometimes, the most precious gift someone can unwittingly give us is the opportunity to discover who we truly are when everything familiar is stripped away. I thought about all the women who might be sitting at home right now suspecting their partner's deception, but too afraid or unsure to act on those suspicions. If I could tell them anything, it would be this: trust yourself. Your intuition is whispering the truth, even when fear tries to drown it out. And on the other side of that fear lies freedom, because sometimes the most wonderful thing someone can do for you is leave. And the most wonderful thing you can do for yourself is realize that you deserve to be loved in the most genuine way. Have you ever had to trust your instincts when everyone else was telling you that you were wrong? What gave you the courage to stand up for yourself? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember, your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the strength to follow your truth, whatever that may be.